Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're going to untangle this whole world of user authentication, but specifically within BitTorrent setups.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. And, you sent over some really interesting stuff to dig into. That essay by Jörg-Owe really lays it all out.
Yeah, his essay is super helpful. And for everyone listening, our goal is to really get how this identity verification thing actually works in BitTorrent, these peer-to-peer file sharing systems, which, as I'm sure you know, are pretty popular.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting because Jörg-Owe starts off his essay by making it very clear that BitTorrent is, at its core, all about this peer-to-peer approach.
Right.
It's not like the old days where you'd have one central server everyone's trying to grab a file from.
Yeah.
Here, users are actually connecting directly to each other to share stuff.
Okay, so to really get this, we need to understand the basics of what a BitTorrent setup looks like. I mean, what are the essential parts?
Right. And Jörg-Owe, he sort of lays out these key components that we need to know about. Like, first off, you have the BitTorrent clients themselves.
Okay.
These are the actual applications, the software we all use, right? Like BitTorrent, uTorrent, or even just the plain BitTorrent client. Those are the tools that let you join the network and, manage everything you're downloading or uploading.
Right. So that's what we interact with directly. But then there are these terms, torrents and magnet links, right? I mean, Jörg-Owe gets into this. What are they?
So think of a torrent file, and this is how Schneppet describes it. It's basically like a little instruction manual, a piece of metadata. It tells your client everything it needs to know about the file, its size, how it's organized. And importantly, it helps your client find other people, other peers, who already have parts of that file. Yeah. Now, magnet links, those are kind of like the next evolution. Instead of downloading a separate .torrent file, you just click a link and it has this special code, a hash, that uniquely identifies the content. And that allows your client to find the right peers without needing that extra file.
Got it. So we have the software, we have the way to find the content, but how does my client actually know where to look for other users who have it?
That's where trackers and DHT come in, the distributed hash table. And these are both things Schneppet goes into detail about. Trackers are like, imagine them as directories.
Yeah, okay.
They keep track of which users are sharing which files. They're kind of like the middlemen helping everyone connect. Now, DHT is more decentralized. It's more resilient.
Right.
It's like the network itself becomes the address book. So even if a tracker goes down, you can still find the peers you need.
Interesting. So DHT is adding an extra layer of robustness to the whole system.
Exactly. It makes it harder to take down, more reliable overall. Now, once those connections are established, the next question is, how does the data actually move from one user to another? That's where the peer communication protocol comes in. And again, Schneppet breaks this down in his essay. It's basically the set of rules that governs how these clients talk to each other. It determines how they request specific pieces of the file, because these files are usually broken down into smaller chunks. Right? It figures out how they tell each other what parts they have and what they still need, how they manage all the uploading and downloading. It's all about efficient communication, so you get those really fast download speeds BitTorrent is known for.
Okay, so that gives us, I think, a pretty good understanding of the core mechanics of BitTorrent, thanks to Schneppet's explanations. But let's get to the main event here, user authentication. Now, Schneppet points out that this wasn't always a standard feature in BitTorrent, but it's becoming more and more common, especially for security reasons.
Right. User authentication is really about confirming who you are, making sure only authorized people can access and share files, especially in places like private trackers, where not just anyone can join. It helps prevent unauthorized access, make sure the data stays reliable, and lets you manage who gets to use what resources.
So how do you actually do this authentication thing? Schneppet talks about a few different methods like multi-factor authentication, MFA, which we hear a lot about in general security conversations.
Yeah, MFA. Schneppet explains that it's about adding layers of security, right? Instead of just your password, you need multiple things to prove you are who you say you are.
Right.
That might be something, like a password, something you have, like a physical key or code from your phone, or even something you are, like a fingerprint. The idea is that if someone gets hold of one piece, they still can't get in without the others. It's like having multiple locks on your door.
Makes sense. Schneppet also talks about token-based authentication, mentioning both physical and virtual tokens.
Right. So here, each user gets this unique token. It's basically a key, either a physical device like a USB stick, or a code generated by a server. And you need that token, along with your username and password, to get in.
Okay.
So it's not enough to just know someone's login details. you need their physical token too.
Yeah.
Schneppat also points out this often uses something called symmetric key authentication, where both the user and the system share a secret key to validate these tokens.
Now, the most common method is probably the one we all know. Credential-based authentication, meaning good old usernames and passwords. But Schneppat points out the weaknesses here.
Yeah, usernames and passwords are easy, but they're also vulnerable. People steal passwords, they guess them, they trick people into giving them up through phishing attacks. So Schneppat is definitely a big proponent of things like strong password policies, making sure people use unique and complex passwords, and using techniques like salting and hashing to protect those passwords in the database.
Could you quickly explain salting and hashing?
Sure. Salting is basically adding a random piece of data to your password before it gets hashed, which is converting it into this kind of jumbled string of characters. This makes it a lot harder for hackers to crack because they can't just use pre-computed tables of common password hashes anymore.
Okay, that makes sense. Schneppat also briefly talks about using things like biometric authentication, fingerprints, facial recognition. Seems pretty secure, but are there any downsides, especially when it comes to BitTorrent?
Well, biometrics are certainly very secure. They're unique to you. But Schneppat probably had concerns about the privacy implications, especially in these decentralized networks. Where is that biometric data being stored? Who has access to it? That becomes a big question.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Well,
and then the last method Schneppat mentions is using social login, logging in with your Facebook or Google account, which is convenient, but
the problem is that your security is now completely tied to the security of that social media platform. If your Facebook gets hacked, well, that could give someone access to your BitTorrent activity, too. It's all about convenience versus control, really.
Okay, so Schneppat lays out all these different ways to do authentication, but he also talks about the challenges of actually implementing it effectively in a BitTorrent setup. What are some of the hurdles?
Well, one of the biggest, as he highlights, is security risks. If you're using weak methods like sending passwords without encryption, well, that's just asking for trouble. And Schneppat makes it clear that just relying on passwords alone isn't enough these days.
Yeah, attackers are getting more and more sophisticated.
Exactly. So you need stronger methods. Another challenge is user compliance and management. It's one thing to have good security in place, but getting everyone to follow the rules could be tough.
Right. Getting people to use strong, unique passwords for every single thing, that's an uphill battle.
Absolutely. And managing all those user accounts, making sure everyone has the right permissions, especially as things change, it can be a real headache.
And then there's always that balance between security and usability. You want to make things secure, but not so complicated that people just give up.
Right, that's a classic dilemma. Make it too secure and nobody uses it. Schneppat was definitely aware of this trade-off. You need to find that sweet spot where security is strong, but the system is still user-friendly.
Absolutely. Now, lastly, Schneppat touches on the legal and regulatory side of things, which seems especially relevant for BitTorrent, given its history with copyright issues.
Yeah, the legal landscape is really important here. Copyright laws are very clear. You can't just download and share copyrighted material without permission.
Yeah.
And as Schneppat points out, you need to be aware of those laws because the consequences can be serious. Lawsuits, fines, even criminal charges in some cases.
Right. It's not something to take lightly.
Definitely not. Schneppat also mentions how a lot of BitTorrent platforms have these arbitration clauses in their terms of service. So, by using them, you're agreeing to settle any disputes through arbitration, not in court. That means you might be waiving your right to a jury trial, and maybe even your ability to join a class action lawsuit.
Wow, that's something most people probably don't even realize they're agreeing to.
Exactly, and Schneppat is flagging that as something to be really mindful of. Then on the regulatory side, he talks about how organizations, especially those dealing with sensitive data, often have to comply with specific regulations like GDPR. These often require strong authentication practices, making sure only authorized people can access certain data. And if they don't comply, well, the penalties can be pretty hefty.
So it seems like user authentication in BitTorrent, as Schneppat so thoroughly lays out, is more than just about keeping people out. It's a whole web of security, user experience, and legal stuff all tangled together.
Right, it's complex. And what Schneppat is showing us is that even though BitTorrent is all about decentralization, the need for good authentication is only becoming more important. It's a real balancing act, making sure things are secure, but also easy to use and legally sound.
So wrapping up, Schneppat gives us this incredibly thorough analysis of authentication in BitTorrent. But it makes me wonder, Given how decentralized BitTorrent is, what kind of crazy new authentication methods might we see in the future? Could there be ways to boost security without sacrificing the freedom and ease of use that have always been at the heart of BitTorrent? Something to ponder, right? Anyway, that's all for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.